Okay, so you heard the robot say that it's in progress, so we're all good. And with that said, I'm also going to ask everybody to just temporarily mute themselves for now. And I will let everybody know what the process is going to be like. But I want to thank Jean Louise, first of all, for being with us. It's a privilege and an honor to be part, I said this to Jean earlier, to be part of her publication book tour. I'm sure there's going to be a long book tour. And thank you to all of you for supporting Jean and for joining us virtually. My name is Frances Bronner, and my co-host, who you saw initially, is our manager, Nick Cronin. And today we will be chatting about Jean Louise's debut novel, Waking Fire, which was published and hot off the press on January 10th. I read it, I think I heard about it and just downloaded it from the library. And so here's how our event will proceed. I'll introduce Jean, and then Jean will talk and read from her book for however long she would like to. And then after that, we will get into the bulk of our of the event, which is the interview I have with her. And hopefully she'll be entertained by the questions that I'll throw at her. And then we will conclude the event with a Q&A. And at that point, that's when, feel free to turn on your videos if you want to. But also during the course of the event, Nick will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that you want to give to or to ask Jean Louise, feel free to put that in the chat during the program. And then when we're in the Q&A section, Nick is going to read them out and she's going to answer. Okay, so let me do the intro. And probably some of you don't need the intro, especially Mom. Mom knows the story of Jean Louise. She grew up with Mom and two sisters in an old Victorian house on the east side of Cleveland. And this, by the way, is from her website. So, I hope you've read this part as well. But so she's always been a storyteller ever since she was a kid, but it wasn't until her 20s that she realized that this was a path that she could follow. And I would love to read this short story that she wrote, this romance novel parody that ended up, it turns out, to be a blockbuster and probably pushed her towards her career. And after that book is when she started writing seriously. And then she entered the New School for writing for children at the New School to pursue her MFA. And since then, she hasn't, I guess she hasn't left New York. And now she lives with her cat, Martha, in New York. It's always good to have a cat. And I asked her, she said when she's not working on her day job, she's either reading a graphic novel or watching a video game. And currently the graphic novel that she's reading, or actually rereading, is Saga by Brian
K. Vaughan.
Brian K. Vaughan, thank you. And then video games, her hands and fingers are busy, fighting bad guys in the Final Fantasy. I'm not a video gamer, so I hope that sounded good.
That's
okay.
Great.
Okay, thank you. So without further ado, here is Jean Louise, the reason why you're all here. Take it away, Jean.
Hi, everyone. So we're here to talk about my book, which is Waking Fire. It came out January 10th, as Frances said. And it's a story about a young girl whose village gets overrun by monsters and a very evil woman. And she has to save her village, protect her family, and do whatever it takes to get control back from this woman called the Mistress. And it's the story, the main character, she is someone that I admire. When I was writing her, I thought about how would I react to the story, to the things that are happening, and then I had her do the opposite. So she's much bolder than I would ever be, which I really liked about her. And so I'm going to read a section of chapter 1. And it starts off where she is at the marketplace picking up some dinner supplies for her mother. And then she notices something happening and she has to get involved because that's her nature. So it starts off with her in the marketplace. And here we go. So it says, I only have 3 silver rubes and 4 coppers left to buy the rest of the ingredients on Oma's shopping list: cumin, ground red chilies, honey, and dried orange peels. The chilies will be the most expensive, so I'll buy them first and then see what I can get with whatever rubes are left. Even though the market's closing, the roads squeezed between stalls and mud brick buildings where one buys spices and cloth, jewels and swords, livestock and produce are still busy enough that I can't run to the next open spice shop. The remaining ingredients and customers haggle over prices while dirty children hold out their hands for scraps and coins. The savory aroma of charred meat cooking on a grill makes my stomach grumble as I pass the crowded food stalls, but that's quickly replaced by the flowery scents coming up from ahead. Perfumed air engulfs me as I cross Honey Street, the place where those who can afford it go to soak their bodies in cleansing oils and fragrance water. I find an open spice shop with a bowl of ground chilies right out front. I motion to the owner, but she ignores me, her eyes on something farther up the road. Excuse me, Samita, I say, trying to get her attention. The owner shoos me away with a wave of her hand without even giving me a glance. Annoyed, I follow her gaze to see what can be so important. A few stalls down, a plume of black smoke rises above the open market. Is that a fire? The woman nods. I think so. As we watch the pillar of smoke grow, more and more people gather in the street, their eyes transfixed on the dark clouds bisecting the sky. It's those Haltai, the man next to me says, a sneer in his voice. They brought in one of those mangy desert animals. What do you call it? A Maghrib? Yeah, the damn thing went berserk. There was some kind of scuffle and a lantern got knocked over and set their tent on fire. I stand on my toes to peer over the heads of those in front of me, but it's no use. I can't see anything except the smoke. What happened to the Maghrib? The man shrugs. Burned to death, I guess. There's no way I could have survived those flames. A frenzied roar fills the streets, quieting the crowd with its intensity. The Maghrib isn't dead yet. I've always felt sorry for Maghribs. They're sickly creatures that the Haltai nomads captured out in the plains beyond the village and charged parents a few rubes to let their children tug on their matted manes or ride on their bony backs. Selling Maghrib rides is one of the few ways Haltai make money to buy supplies so that they can survive the rocky plains. But the Maghribs always look so sad, so beaten, as if the rope that keeps them tied to a stake in the ground is sapping all of the life out of them. I can't turn my back on a creature in pain, not if there's something I can do to help. I forget the orders from my mother not to dally and push my way through the crowd toward the fire. The smoke thickens as I get closer, stinging my eyes and making me cough, but I trudge ahead. I finally burst through the crowd and see the Haltai nomads tossing buckets of water onto the flames, which raged like a beacon in the night. Merchants with stalls on either side of the fire clearing out their wares while using wet cloths to beat away the flames that lick the wooden structures. The Maghrib words again. A wall of flames separates the animal from safety. Through the fire, I catch glimpses of the poor beast, its mouth wide open, its heavy paws pacing back and forth. Its short snout contains massive, sharp teeth, and anxious muscles ripple beneath the rust-colored fur covering its broad shoulders and hindquarters. Waves of heat prevent anyone from getting too close and helping. Someone has to do something, or that Maghrib is going to die. So that's from chapter 1.
Thank you, Jean, for that. I love that scene because it's so cinematic and so action-packed. Well, first of all, you take us through the market and all those spices. And then right away, you throw us into a literal fire, which was brilliant. But could you talk about, I had so many other beginning questions, but this is a good one to start right here. Could you talk about fashioning or crafting that first chapter, knowing that this is the one that's going to hook us? But by the way, the prologue was equally very engaging. So maybe you could talk about those two because they both set up the novel pretty well in terms of, enticing the reader.
Yeah, so the first chapter has changed so much from when I first wrote the book. Originally, Naira and her twin brother Nez, they're off in the desert having an adventure. And then it turned into, the chapter was going to start with Naira in a schoolyard fight with the 2 bullies that she meets later on in the story. And then my editor was the one who came up with the idea of opening it with the fire
Mm.
and the marketplace and combining the schoolyard fight into one opening chapter. And I thought that was brilliant. So I gave it a try, and that's what we ended up with. And then my editor also had the idea for the prologue. She said, because there's so much history in this world, and it was just finding a way to get it into the story without being like info dumping, And so she said, how can we do this? Maybe try a prologue. And so I thought of doing it from the character Gamma Call, who is will become an important character in the story, but doing it from his voice because he gets mentioned in the book, but we don't learn much about him until much later. So it'd be good to start with something from him so that when he shows up later in the book, you're like, I remember that guy from the prologue. So
And that's how I knew that there's going to be a sequel, because this guy was so interesting. And it was such a nice little, kind of dangle that you put in there. But talk to us about creating this world, because as you know, fantasy readers and writers, they get immersed in the world. But it has to be, what was it about fantasy writing that attracted you to it? And then how was building a world for you? I mean, you were in charge.
yeah, that's what I love about it, is because I can do whatever I want. There's no rules,
Yeah.
but you make the rules rather. But for me, I've always loved fantasy, just the imagination it takes to do something like that. I've always had a big imagination. Like I could spend hours just daydreaming. I still daydream too much. But when it came to building this world building is one of my favorite things about writing, because all the things that interest me, all the stuff that I learn about, just even conversations I have with people, I try to find a way to work it in somehow, because I feel like if I am interested in this and if I love this, then I think some other people will too. So I wanted to set the book in a place that's not typical for a fantasy. It originally started off to be very Eurocentric, so there were castles and knights in armor and that kind of thing. And then I realized I was just copying what I had read growing up, because most fantasy is like Lord of the Rings type fantasy, as far as settings and characters. So I wanted to do something totally different, because I found out I was more interested in other parts of the world. And so I was highly influenced by like Eastern Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, and especially the Sahara Desert region. All of that was, and I also have like some Eastern influences in there, just all the things that I just find fascinating. I tried to, just be inspired by and help me build this world, which I think I got everything in there, but I have some surprises for the next book. Some interesting locales that we'll be checking out. So
Yeah, it was definitely, I think the desert setting was really something. I'm not a big fantasy reader, so that's not something I've come across. So that was really wonderful to be part of that setting. Now, I'm going to geek out just for a second, but what kind of, when you were building this world, were you using kind of tools to make sure? Because I know that I think your friend made the map. So how did you physically create this or how did you translate it from your brain and onto the page to make sure that it looks and feels real?
So the map was actually created by my niece.
Ah,
And she is 17. So she was 16 at the time she made it. But she's a really great artist. And so I asked her if she could help me with it. And we came up with that. And then there were, so she did the main sketch of it. And then artists at my publisher, Inkyard, cleaned it up and made it, ready to be published. But she did the initial sketch. And that's basically what you see in there is what she drew. And then as far as, I am not an artist, and I just keep it all in my head. Like I do a lot of research. I go on Wikipedia a lot. I watch a lot of movies, watch interviews with people, especially I like looking at historical photos of people in their traditional costumes and seeing what those look like. And then I file it away in here. And then I pull it out when I need it. Sometimes I'll have folders, and I did for the cover, actually, my publisher asked me to do a Pinterest board of what the main character might be wearing and what her hair would look like. So that was the first time I did that, but that's actually a really fun way to find ideas and come up with new ways to show off characters.
Yeah, and there were so not just characters, but the creatures in this book was so
Oh,
fascinating. How did you come up with that? Oh my gosh, I forget the name of the
the
monsters.
yeah, the
Um,
Rogul Dombey.
Dombey, yes. In my head,
Yes.
it's just Dombey.
Yeah, they call him Dombey most of the time.
Right. I mean, how did that, was that a fever dream? And where did these things come from?
Honestly, I don't know. I know, to me, I think there's an origin in the movie Return to Oz that came out in like the 80s when I was a little kid. And there are these characters in there called wheelies, and there were these men on all fours, and they had like wheels on their hands, and so they would just roll around and they were chasing Dorothy. And I just remember being so creeped out by them, and the fact that these are humans that are on all fours and their arms were too long, so that like just having those extra long arms is kind of creepy to me. And so I just turned them into these monsters. I think I was really influenced by those wheelies because they terrified me when I was a kid.
And that's, to me, that's always fascinating. I love to hear about the reading influences of a writer, and or even not just reading but movies. So I now that you've mentioned the Dorothy reference, what was on little Jean's bookshelf when she was starting out as a reader, before she started doing these full-fledged stories?
I read So I started out reading things like, I was in love with Judy Blume books, and then I graduated to. I made it a goal. We in our local library that was near my house, we they had one section of the book that was devoted to classics, so like Jane Austen and those kinds of books. And I said I'm going to read every book on that shelf. But I was real young. I was probably like 10 or 11, so a lot of it just went over my head. But I read quite a few shelves. I didn't get the whole shelf read, but so I just, I guess, you know to me those were a fantasy because it was a world I had never thought of, because they take place hundreds of years ago with people that
Yeah.
I'll never meet. So it was easy to turn those into like a fantasy and imagine what it would be like. And I think just having that imagination and having those books take me to these places I never even thought of. That's just always been something that I've treasured, and now I wanted to do something like that in my book. I wanted to do something that I felt was, for me, was different from a lot that I've already read, and just create a world that just felt brand new.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something I really work toward. Like I'm just everything in there is just like something that I try to, it may have been influenced by other things, but I'm just put a little twist on it to make it a more original or something interesting.
And I often, seeing the little Jean Louise too at the library, that is like our ideal library goer. Of course, you were talking about Jane Austen, and as a little girl, person of color, trying to find sort of characters that you could really relate to. Um, Now that you've written this book and the main characters are people of color, do you find that, were you writing for little Jean when you were writing this book? Who was your ideal reader at this point?
That's a great question, because one of the things, as I mentioned, the book started out being very Eurocentric. And so the main character was white, and pretty much everyone in her world was white. And then, but it never felt right to me. And I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't clicking. And so then I decided to make the main character more like me. So then she's brown skin and she, has curly hair. And then I took her out of the castle and I put her in a desert and I said, oh, there she is. That's my girl. And so I took it from there. And I really do hope that there are other, little girls who don't see themselves in other fantasy offerings, that they can, come to this book and see someone that's more like them and lives in a world that they're more used to seeing in their daily lives.
Definitely. And in fact, another thing that I thought, because I said, so Naira is described as light-skinned, I believe, but there were other characters of a darker complexion. And in addition to that, we also have a queer couple in the mix. I believe that's Bashira, the librarian. Yes. All right, librarian. And her partner, Mandisa. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. But, these bits of information are not in the foreground. They're sort of just but they're mentioned. So what was your approach to race and queerness and intersectionality as you were writing this book?
So I did want race to be a part of it. I wanted it very clear what her community looked like and the people in her community, and that she does feel a little bit like an outsider, and that's because of other reasons, which you'll find out later in the book.
Right.
But I wanted it very clear from the beginning that she lives in a community of brown and black skinned people, and that's her life, and that's all she knows, and that's fine. That's what that's just how it is. There's nothing for her, there's nothing special about it. But I think for people who aren't used to reading books or fantasy that take place in communities like that, I hope that they find this book and it speaks to them in that kind of way. And then as far as having Bashira and Mandisa, I know Bashira has always been a queer character for me. As just from the very beginning, I just knew that's who she was. And I wanted her to have a relationship in the book, but I didn't want to put a lot of focus on it to make it seem like it's something odd. I wanted to feel like natural every day. Of course, Bashira has a girlfriend. There's, that's just who Bashira is. That's what happens, So I didn't want to like put a big spotlight on, look at this lesbian couple. We have, but that's just, her friend's sister has a girlfriend, and, that's everyday life for them. I didn't want queerness to be something that people feel out of place for being, or feel like they have to hide or anything like that. I want this world to be different in that kind of way.
And in a way, because in other fantasy novels where the default is, let's say, white, or just assumed to be that, straight, cis, it's nice that this was also, it's just there, but not, like you said, so highlighted that becomes the central point of the book. In a way, it's really about Naira's journey.
And for Bashira, I didn't want her to be like the gay librarian. I didn't want. She's Bashira with who scares people with her words.
Right.
She's a leader. She's very smart, and I like the queerness is part of her identity, but it's not her whole identity.
Right.
So.
And I certainly got that. She was one of my favorite characters. Also, just because she was a librarian too. And then another one that I found touching, one of the themes was the experience of being a refugee, of feeling constantly besieged, of not having a home. And those are the people who are coming from, I believe, the North, going into, to Naira's place. I thought that was also a nice theme to touch on, especially given so many people have that experience now. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as I was writing the book and as I was writing Cal's character, it really dawned on me that he has a very difficult past. Just imagining what it must have been like growing up in a war-torn environment, because he's from the North and that's where the war is happening. And pretty much his whole life has been about this war. And as I got deeper and deeper to his character, I realized some of the things he might have gone through. And I wanted to include that in the story because I felt like it was important. I didn't want to gloss over the war because it's a bad war is terrible, and it does terrible things to families and especially young children. and someone growing up in that environment, it would not have been fun. It would not have been nice for him to come to this place that was described as a paradise to him, and to find out that it was pretty much true. These people they know nothing about the war. They've been hidden and secluded for almost 20 years. They don't know what's going on up there. So I thought that him coming in with that different perspective of like, yeah, you guys, it's fun down here, but you need to get back to reality because
Yeah.
people up north need our help. So it just made his character deeper and stronger for me, to acknowledge what he went through and to dive into that and explore it a little bit.
Yeah, that was and especially because war for at any age, but especially at that age, 16, when you're kind of forming your identity, and then to have to, he had to go cross the desert and bring his father with him. I mean, that's a typical war-torn refugee experience. So I really appreciate that you put that in there. And the other thing, so these are teenagers that are going through these just horrific stuff. And I think, are they all 16? Are they mostly 16 years old, or?
Yeah, the main Naira, her twin, and her friends. Bashir is older because she's
yeah, right.
3 months older sister. But the main 4 are all around 16. I think Cal might be 17. He's 1 year older. Yeah.
And the reason why I ask is because, so those are just very formative years. You have a little bit of independence, but not quite. What was your decision making for that age? Because they are the main protagonists. You could easily have done like a 13-year-old, maybe a 20-year-old. Why that sweet spot?
I think it's because a lot of what you just said, because when you're 16, you think you know everything. You think you can solve problems, and you might not see it with the eyes of an older person who can see the bigger picture. And so when Naira decides, yeah, let's go out there and let's take back our village, as a 16-year-old, you feel like you can do that. It makes sense, and then, an adult would have talked her out of it. And that's why, they have to sneak away. But yeah, I think if she was younger, it wouldn't be believable for a 13-year-old to go against such monsters and come out unscathed. I don't think that would be very believable. But if she was older, I'm as I write the book, as she gets older, she gets wiser and not so impulsive. So
Yeah.
I think I just think that age is where you do make these kinds of decisions that, when you're younger, you can't, you're not going to win a fight against a monster. And when you're an adult, you also know you're not going to win a fight against a monster just because you've lived through so much. But as a teenager, when you're 15, 16, 17, you think you can do anything. And that's right where she is.
I applaud that age choice, because I said, yeah, they're so ballsy at that age, and both kind of narrow-eyed, but so idealistic as well. So it just fits Naira's character. Another question for you is why you gave her a twin with Nez, because I know she's the one on the cover, and she's the main person, but why a twin?
I really can't answer that.
Oh, is it a sequel thing?
It'll be explored more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's it wasn't just a fluke of it was fated kind of thing. It's yeah, it'll be
Okay.
important for later.
No, so it's not like you have a twin. Do you have a twin?
No, I don't.
No, okay. All right. I don't want to spoil anything for the sequel. So, but thank you. That was one of my wonderings. But so with these characters, because how did you get inside their heads? Am I allowed to say who the antagonist is, the bad person?
The mistress or
Mistress, yeah, okay, the mistress.
Yeah.
Like, how did you even get into the head of this just horrified character, but gripping? So what's your process like?
For me, actually, the villains, the antagonists are more fun to write because they can just turn on a dime and do whatever they want. They don't have these morals that are holding them back from doing certain things that the protagonist will have. And the protagonist is, always trying to do the right thing or what they feel is the right thing. And for me, the villains they're just trying to accomplish their goal. And some of them would do it through any means necessary, which the mistress is one of those kinds of people. So that's always fun to write because they're so unpredictable.
Yeah.
Or at least she was very unpredictable for me. So I would just put her in these situations and how is she going to get out of this? Carnage. She's just going to go, she's just going to, bury her in her way. She's just going to knock it right down, And so she was really fun to write. And to pit the main character against someone like that, there were some times I'm like, how am I going to figure this one out? She's put them she's got their backs are against the wall. How are they going to get out of this? So that was fun trying to figure that stuff out too.
I would say she has to be my favorite character of all of them. I mean, and I don't want to spoil anything, but my gosh, excellent backstory. And yeah, awesome. How did you come up with the names? That's the other thing. Because, and I was listening to the audiobook. So initially when you read science fiction, some of the names kind of trip you up, but after a while it just flowed, Dombey and Nez. And I mean, they just were beautiful. How did you come up with that?
Well, I took a lot of inspiration from different cultures. Like I don't think I've ever told anyone, but Naira's name actually comes from Nairobi. And so I was like, that's, I'll just change it a little bit and so I just just things, some of the names, like South Pike's name has been there since the beginning. That's one of the few things that never changed from the beginning of that since I started writing the story. And then her friend, they just sound nice. Bashira just sounded nice on my tongue, so sometimes I'll just play around and just put some letters in a name and see what comes up, and it works. And then there are some names that take a really long time to come together. I would say like the father's name. I wanted something really strong and powerful, and it took a long time for his name to come together, but I was happy with what I ended up with.
No, they're beautiful. And another my favorite part of the story was just the mythology, the religion part of it. The three-faced God. Oh my gosh, I love that. Just the image of it and the name, and then the 13 gods. Again, how did you come up with that? What was the inspiration for this? It's just, and I have a feeling that it'll, follow through with the sequels on this book.
Yeah, the dragon gods. The story idea started off for me was a young girl and a dragon, and they would somehow have to figure out how to work together to defeat whatever the evil was going to be. So that was like the core that always was part of the story. So dragons were always part of it. But as I was writing the book, they changed, and the dragons in this story are not your typical dragons at all. And you'll find out more about them in the second book. But the three-faced god was also another one where that one evolved. It came into the story kind of late, and then I figured out what I wanted to do with them, and then I worked them in. But they evolved. They used to be three different like sisters, and then I made them one, and it's a god with three faces has like three different personalities, but they're still just one entity, one being. And religion was very important to me, and I was really happy when I got the editor, my editor Claire, that she also agreed. All the things that I loved about the book, the goriness, the religion, and the setting, and just how how Naira is a fighter, all the stuff that I wanted to keep, she also loved. And so I was really glad that I didn't have to like make the religion it's a little bit complex in the fact that there ends up being multiple gods in this world. And so I was glad that I was able to keep those aspects. For me, I just felt like that really added to the story. And I wanted to make it such a big part of her world and her family's life. And I was glad that I was able to keep that in there.
Why was religion so important for you and for the book? Because yes, I did love all the, they had the rituals and their little, I think, yeah.
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 I also grew up going to church a lot. And so it was a big part of my life growing up. And I kind of feel like Naira at times where it's like, you're praying and prayers are being answered, and then how does that make you feel? What do you do with those feelings? And there are other people around you who are very devout, like her father, and you're just, you start questioning things like, and so I understood that part of her character a lot. And so it was important to me to keep that in there, because I think at that age, that is when you start questioning and, asking those kinds of questions, like, and she does. And I liked that was part of her character. I liked that was part of her society. And I liked that it was something that she admires her father so much, but that's like the one thing that she just doesn't understand about him,
Yeah.
And so I felt like that was important, that he was very devout and she's going the opposite way. And what does that do to their relationship later in the story? So.
And it creates a lot of not just tension between the characters, but all kinds of moral dilemmas and kind of themes, thematic things that you can touch on, or that you did in this book and then later on. So very rich vein to tap into.
Yeah, it is. And I there's even more coming. So
Oh, I don't even, should I ask how many books will be, print that you're writing after this? Are you envisioning a big series?
so there'll be a sequel, and that one's coming out in 2024.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, well, it sounds
Wow.
like a long time, but it's really not.
Yeah, that'll be
It'll be here
soon.
before I know it. But yeah, that comes out next year. And I am working on that one right now. And we're gonna get to the end in that book. So
Wow.
it'll be a duology.
Oh, oh, okay. And then you'll end it with that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I just, the world is so rich that you could keep going like George or R.R. Martin and, not quit.
Um, well,
But
unlike him, though, I think I would want to get to the end, just because having it
yes,
hanging over my head, it
right,
would just
right, right.
kill me. Yeah, I'm also like the people who read the book, if they're wanting to know what happens next. Me too. So
Yeah. Well, in the writing process, and I have so many nuts and bolts questions, but I want to make sure that we get to our participants as well. But what part was the most fun to write of this book, and what was most difficult or challenging to write?
so for me, the most fun were the interactions between Naira and her brother. Because she's very serious and she takes things to herself too seriously and others, and he's a big goofball. And I
He's
didn't.
funny. I like him.
I'm glad you said that, because I
Yeah.
was worried. I didn't intend for him to be funny. Like, that's just how his character came. And when I have a writing group, and we meet and we talk about our writing and we help each other. And when they said that he was funny and they liked it, and I was like, oh, I can write funny. Well, I'm going to do more of that. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing him, because it was such a break from Naira, who can get too serious sometimes. But that was fun to do. And the hardest part for me was getting into the emotions of the characters,
Ah,
just going deep and like really figuring out what's going on with them, and how they're feeling and how to deal with that. So that was hard. Sometimes I would just sit there and wait and pause and just say, what is she really feeling right here, and how is she going to react to that?
yeah.
So that was the parts. Those were the parts where I struggled the most. But also my writing group is really good at pointing out, like, she needs to react. What's going on here? More emotion. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying so hard, guys, but I'll do it.
Yeah, it's got to be tough because most fantasy readers too, they expect a lot of action. But for me, I really appreciate those kind of pauses where you're inside the characters' body and emotions, and you get to know how they're feeling. I thought you would have a hard time with the action scenes, the fighting scenes. There were so many, and they were, oh my gosh, so involved.
Those are actually really easy. That's
Really?
one of the few things I'm good at is action. So I did not have trouble with that. It was the emotional aspect, and
Yeah.
that was the hardest part.
Well, all right. Well, yeah, and they pay off. They pay off. Now another, you mentioned your writing group, so they provided valuable impact or feedback. Were there any other things that that they kind of helped you on the journey with, not just character development, but other kind of nitty-gritty things?
Well, I have one group member who really impacted the story in a huge way. I asked her to read the opening, and because when you're querying, you send agents the first few 1 to 3 chapters, and then if they like it, they ask for more. And I wanted to make sure I was sending the very best, so I would ask her, "Oh, can you read these chapters? Make sure they're good." And she read them, and she said, "Well, your story really starts with chapter 3. So you could cut 1 and 2." And I'm like, "Oh no." But she was right. And so
Yeah.
I cut those chapters, and the details that I thought were important, I found ways to incorporate into later in the book. And that changed everything. So
Wow.
like that kind of feedback. First, it's a little bit at first, shocking. Like, what? I thought I was doing so good. But then when I sat and thought about it, I was like, you know what? She's right. I'm gonna
She
have
was
to do
right.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good to have that kind of good, close, tight-knit group who can give you honest feedback. And, Jean Louise, I have like 50 other questions here. I'm looking at all my index cards, but I want to make sure we get to our participants. But here's just a few things. So what was the one most surprising thing that you learned through this journey about yourself, about writing? This is your first book, published book. What is your big takeaway from it?
Um, when I as my publication date was getting closer, I was getting more and more like a little bit stressed out, like, oh my gosh, it's coming and there's so much to do. I need to promote it. I need to go on social and talk about it. And I was overwhelming myself. And a writing group member told me, she's like, just calm down. You accomplished your goal, and your goal was to get published, and you did it. And everything else that comes after, that's just like icing on the cake. But you hit your goal. And I was like, you're right. This was my goal all this time, was to get a book published. And after that conversation with her, it just helped me just like to go along with the ride and just see what happens next. And I promote it on social when I can, and I am doing events like this, which I love. But I'm not so stressed out about it. So just refocusing and remembering like what my goals were, and the fact that I actually achieved one of them is something that I've learned to do, and I'm so grateful that she was able to talk me down.
Yeah, pat yourself on the back. This was, I mean,
Yeah.
this is humongous. Not everybody can say that they've published a book, and not self-published, but out there. So just a few fun questions, and then we'll turn it over to our participants here. If your book were made into a movie, which actors would play your characters?
Oh, that's a great question. I would love for Viola Davis to be the mistress.
Oh,
I think she has it in her to play a character like that. I
yes.
would love it for her to, and that character needs someone that's powerful, just like her. Um, as for Naira, I think I would want someone unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Just because at this moment I can't think of anyone that I think would fit. So I would be happy with an unknown actress taking over that role. And then I haven't really thought about the other characters too much, because I think as you mentioned, sometimes it can seem a little cinematic. And the scenes between Naira and the mistress for me were like movies playing in my head. So I kind of can picture them more than anybody else. But
Yeah.
I think Viola Davis would be my number. If somehow she got attached to this book, I would just die.
I think that's all you need. Viola Davis, headline, and then everything else will work out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she's amazing. And then finally, okay. If you could invite 3 people for dinner, whom would you invite? And these are, let's say, well, it can't be anybody. Literary people, authors that are
Oh.
your favorites.
Alive or dead? Or
Yes,
either?
or even undead, or or imaginary.
Oh, I would like to have a conversation with Charles Dickens. I
Ooh,
was really into like Great Expectations and those books growing up. I would love to meet Judy Blume. She's, as I mentioned, I adore her books,
yeah.
even today. And as for the last one, there's just so many to choose from. I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. I can't pick a single name, just one name. But
Yeah, that
yeah, that those
okay.
two for
You can,
sure.
yeah. If something comes up, just let us know.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay, so I want to turn it over to Nick so he can look at the chats, and our participants, you guys can turn on your cameras if you would like to. If you want to, if you want Jean to see your faces, that would be great. Especially mom. Mom can come. Oh, there's mom. Okay. Mom, you should be very proud. What an achievement. This is amazing. Okay, Nick, I'll give it over to you.
Fair enough. Thank you, Francis. So I don't see anything in the chat right now, but we've got a few minutes. So if anybody would like to send a question, you're welcome to do so. I suspect we've got nothing because people were so engaged listening to a really, really wonderful conversation. So thank you for that. As we're waiting, I did have a couple of questions just on the process and you as a writer. Do you have a favorite writing place that you have to be in, or can you write anywhere at all?
I can write anywhere as long as it's kind of quiet. Like I can have the TV on in the background, not too many distractions, but I've written in hotel rooms. My sister, we went out to, I think it was Atlantic City one time, and I stayed in the
Oh,
hotel room and wrote while they went to the spa. So so I can write pretty much anywhere as long as I get like in the zone.
That's a great gift to have because if you're tied to the one location, obviously it's more difficult to do. What about writer's block? I'm always really, really interested in hearing from writers as to whether they experienced it or not. And if you did, what did you do?
For me, when I am struggling, it's usually due to lack of motivation, and that comes from usually outside things. It really doesn't have anything to do with the story. So if I'm having a lot going on at work or some personal issues, it hinders my desire to write, and that's what I consider my writer's block. But once I get past that, I'm just like a runaway train and just get to the end. So I, it's not really a block for me. It's kind of like a plug that as soon as I get rid of that external thing, then I get right back on track.
Yeah, I think it's probably particularly hard to balance work and expending energy on that and then expecting to be creative when you get into the writing mode. That's a difficult
Luckily,
balancing act.
my day job, it's a creative job, so that I'm constantly, I actually edit and I draft text for this organization that I work for. So I'm always in a writing kind of mode.
wow.
But there are times we have events and, it's all hands on deck. And so it gets, I don't have as much time to write as I would like to. So that those kinds of issues do pop up. But I've never actually been like stuck where I didn't know where the story was going, or it was just the motivation to sit down and actually do it.
Yeah.
That was what was lacking for me.
And I just see a question coming through on the chat, but right before I get to that, the last question I had in your writing process was, if you think back, way back to the day when you actually started writing Waking Fire, did you know where exactly it was going, or did it discover its way along the way? Did you know the whole plot A to Z, or did you find it as you went?
Yeah, it's changed over time. Originally, the first story that I mentioned, the Eurocentric one, that ending is totally different than the ending that I have now. So it depends on what version of the book. For this one, there are some things though from the very first idea of the book to now that haven't changed. But the ending that I have in this book and my writing group and my sisters who know the story will be very happy to know that some of the ideas that I had originally will change, and some things that they were hoping to happen will actually happen. So
Yeah.
Ooh. And Nick, I think there's one from Shyla.
Yes.
Okay.
Shyla asks, what was the hardest scene to write?
the hardest scene for me is one at the end of the book where Naira has to deal with, I don't want to spoil anything, but she has to deal with something that she never expected, and it comes at her hard and fast, and it's a very emotional scene for her. And she can't fight back the way she would like to. So that one was really hard, just getting the emotions right and not overdoing it, not, trying to just making it seem real how she would respond and that kind of thing. That one was really hard to get it right.
Yeah, okay. And we had a question from Helen. From the start of the book, food plays a very descriptive role in this book. I especially loved the scene talking about almost cooking. Have you tried cooking any food from this world, or what would some real life counterparts be?
I have not tried cooking these exact foods because I don't have recipes for them, but I will say I have cooked foods that come from the cuisines that inspired the food in the book. So a lot of Middle Eastern spices and some Turkish meals. I made the other day some rice with like a Turkish spice chicken, and that was really good. So like I have had meals that kind of inspired what ends up in the book. There is this one dessert that they have where it's like a cake with a rose flavored icing on it that I would love to try. So if anyone could figure out how to make that.
People do make rose flavored stuff. Yeah.
Helen wants to know if book 3 can be a recipe book. She's very taken with your food.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's work on that together.
In fact, in the first chapter, the whole time I was worried that Naira would never get all the spices that her mother wants. I was like, when is she going to get all of them? I don't think she got it. I think, yeah, she had to fight. Yeah, she had to fight. Okay.
Yeah, she had to fight. There's no other choice for her.
Exactly. First things first. Let's see. Anybody, I wonder if anybody else has
There's
questions. We
one
got a
from
couple.
Natalie, and she says,
Oh,
what in your
good.
opinion, are the most important elements of good writing?
I will say for me is authenticity. As I mentioned, I was writing a story that I wasn't really feeling, and I just didn't it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like my voice wasn't coming out. I didn't really like this where I was going with it. And then when I finally figured out the story that I actually wanted to write, and it all came together for me. And I think for me, I like had to learn, you don't always have to write what you know. It's fine to write what you don't know. I grew up reading and watching movies that were, you know, white characters in a European setting, like I mentioned, like a Lord of the Rings kind of thing. And so I had to dig deep to find this world and create a world that no one's ever seen before. And, with characters that are totally different than what you might see on a movie screen. So I, that was really fun to do. But also I think as a writer, you have to do what's true to you. You have to do what makes a sense for you in the book and not what you think others will enjoy too much. I mean, so writing is a little bit selfish, you have to indulge yourself a little bit. keep the audience in mind at times, but you also have to do what's right for the book.
Yeah.
And I think if you do that, then it'll work out for you.
And, oh, mom has a question. All right.
Hi, Jeannie. How you doing, baby?
Hi.
I was remembering how we went to the libraries, and did we ever get too many books? She always had bags of books. Do you remember? We brought back bags of books. Because I learned as a kid coming up with no money, you had to see something else in life, and books did that. Libraries do that. You can meet a whole nother set of possibilities. And I wanted you guys to discover what I discovered. You saw kids doing grown-up decisions. These fantasy books, they could jump in there and take charge and change things around. And I'm just delighted you took all of that. You were carrying around your library books back and forth to the house, and maybe we couldn't find one now and then, but we just enjoyed that library. And now you've been able to turn it around and you filled a hole. You have these stories for these kids that don't find their face in the storybooks. And it's changed since you were a kid. It's changed a lot since I was a kid. But I'm just delighted you've got your new book out. I know how hard you worked on it. You just really cared about the details, and I think it shows. And I'm just really proud of you, baby. That's it.
Do you have
That
a
is-
question?
I don't think, yeah, I don't think a question is necessary.
No.
That,
I was just gushing. I was gushing.
that was a beautiful,
Oh, that
beautiful
was so nice.
sentiment.
Thank you.
I know. And you kind of rounded off this whole journey for Jean. Started off with, the little girl who started reading all these books, bags from the library. And here we are at a library setting, even though it's virtual.
That's
So
it.
Mom, thank you for you. I think you put the icing on the cake on this wonderful journey that's only just begun for your daughter. We're so proud of her. And I hope you'll visit us again for the sequel when it comes. And I just want to make sure that everybody else was able to ask their burning questions for burning, waking fire, burning, questions for Jean. Jean, any last few words before we round off this wonderful event with you?
This has been really great, and what a great conversation. Thank you so much, Francis and Nick,
Oh.
and thank you to my friend Natalie, who helped make this happen.
Yes.
And I just want to assure my mother, we carried home all those books, and yes, I read every single one. It was worth it.
What a beautiful gift, Mom, to give to your daughter. And yes, and Natalie, thank you for bringing Jean to our attention and getting this going. We're excited for your journey. So this is wonderful. Please come back when you want to. And to all of you who joined us, thank you. And it's been a wonderful night. And keep reading out there, and let's spread the love of books. Jean, thank you once again.
Thank you, Jean.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Mom. I hope it's okay. I've been calling her Mom all this time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jean.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I will
Thank you.
email the link to you, Jean.
Okay,
when this
great.
is all
Thank
over.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye. There.